Hi, this is for the Nature vs. Nurture project. As you can see, I am using a text-to-speech bot, so I am sorry in advance for mispronouncements, and yes, I took inspiration from one of the examples, but I don't like the sound of my own voice on recordings, so you will have to deal with this. Anyway, I will be talking about Dean Corll's serial killer, aka Candy Man, or the Pied Piper. Warning: this video talks about murder and child sexual assault. Dean Corll was a serial killer and sex offender who abducted, raped, tortured, and murdered a minimum of 28 teenage boys and young men between 1970 and 1973 in Houston and Pasadena, Texas. He was aided by two teenage accomplices. Dean Arnold Corll was born on December 24, 1939, in Fort Wayne, Indiana, the first child of Mary Emma Robison and Arnold Edwin Corll. He had two siblings, Stanley Corll, and a half-sister, Joyce Janine. Corll graduated from Vidor High School in the summer of 1958. Mary sold the family home and relocated to a trailer home in Memphis, Tennessee. Corll's mother married a traveling clock salesman named Jake West and moved to Vidor, Texas, where he was born. Then he and his family moved to the northern outskirts of Houston so that the family candy business could be closer to the city where the majority of their product was sold. Corll's father was strict and protective of his sons, leading to frequent quarreling and a divorce in 1946. Mary sold the family home and relocated to a trailer home in Memphis, Tennessee, where Arnold was drafted into the United States Air Force. Corll was a shy and serious child who rarely socialized but displayed concern for others' well-being. At 7, he suffered an undiagnosed rheumatic fever, which was not recognized until 1950. Corll's parents attempted reconciliation and remarried in 1950, but the reconciliation was short-lived. In 1953, the couple divorced again, with the mother retaining custody of her two sons. Corll's mother married a traveling clock salesman named Jake West and moved to Vidor, Texas, where he was born. Corll and his stepfather started a small family candy company, working day and night while attending school. From 1954 to 1958, Corll attended Vidor High School, where he was a well-behaved student with satisfactory grades. Corll's family opened a pecan prince shop, and in 1960, he moved to Indiana with his widowed grandmother. He formed a close relationship with a local girl but rejected a marriage proposal. He returned to Houston in 1962 to help with the family's candy business. Corll's mother divorced West in 1963 and started a new candy company called Corll Candy Company. Her eldest son was named vice president, and his younger brother Stanley was named secretary-treasurer. The same year, one of Corll Candy Company's teenage male employees complained to Corll's mother that her son had made sexual advances toward him. As a result, she fired the teenager. Corll was drafted into the U.S. Army in 1964 and trained at Fort Polk, Georgia, and Fort Benning, Georgia. He applied for an honorable discharge to support his family's business, which was granted on June 11, 1965. After his release, Corll revealed that he first realized his homosexuality during service and experienced sexual encounters. He didn't have kids or get married. He was never arrested before this. Between 1970 and 1973, Corll killed at least 28 victims, mostly males aged 13 to 20, in Houston Heights. Most were abducted by Corll's teenage accomplices, David Owen Brooks and Elmer Wayne Henley. Corll lured victims into his vehicles or a 1969 Chevrolet Corvette, and they were plied with alcohol or drugs until they passed out. They were stripped naked, tied to Corll's bed or a plywood torture board, sexually assaulted, beaten, tortured, and sometimes killed by strangulation or shooting. Their bodies were tied in plastic sheeting and buried in various locations. Corll often forced victims to explain their absences to their parents, and he retained keepsakes from his victims. Henley woke up to find himself on his stomach and Corll snapping handcuffs onto his wrists. Curley and Williams were bound with nylon rope and gagged with adhesive tape, and Curley was stripped naked. Corll awoke and revealed that he was angry with Henley for bringing a girl to his house and intended to kill all three after he had assaulted and tortured Curley. Henley tried to calm him down, but Coral continued to threaten to shoot him. After about 30 minutes of discussion, Coral agreed to participate in the torture and murder of both Williams and Curley if Henley released him. He then carried Curley and Williams into his bedroom and tied them to opposite sides of his torture board. Henley ordered him to cut away Williams's clothes and began to assault and torture Curley. Coral's death occurred when Henley asked Coral if he could take Williams into another room. Coral ignored him and Henley grabbed Coral's pistol, shouting, "You've gone far enough, Dean." Henley fired at Coral, hitting him in the forehead, but the bullet failed to fully penetrate his skull. Coral then ran out of the room, hitting the wall of the hallway. Henley fired 3 additional bullets into his lower back and shoulder as Coral slid down the wall outside the room where the 2 other teenagers were bound. Coral was never arrested. Coral's death occurred when Henley asked Coral if he could take Williams into another room. Coral ignored him and Henley grabbed Coral's pistol, shouting, "You've gone far enough, Dean." Henley fired at Coral, hitting him in the forehead, but the bullet failed to fully penetrate his skull. Coral then ran out of the room, hitting the wall of the hallway. Henley fired 3 additional bullets into his lower back and shoulder as Coral slid down the wall outside the room where the 2 other teenagers were bound. Henley remembered that Coral would have been proud of his actions during the confrontation, adding that Coral had been training him to react quickly and forcefully. After shooting Coral, Henley released Curley and Williams from the torture board and they discussed their actions. Coral never got to show remorse or regret, nor did he get a trial. Nature primarily refers to our DNA. It covers the genes we are born with as well as other genetic elements that can influence how our personality develops from childhood to adulthood. Babies, for example, are born with innate features. According to anecdotal evidence, a child's personality qualities agreeableness, conscientiousness, extraversion, neuroticism, and openness were predetermined before birth. The environmental elements that influence who we are referred to as nurture. This encompasses our early childhood experiences, our upbringing, our social ties, and the culture around us. The nature versus nurture debate revolves around the role of genetics and environmental factors in human development. Philosophers like Plato and Descartes argue that traits are inborn, while John Locke advocates tabula rasa, stating that our experiences determine our identity. Behaviorists, like John B. Watson, believe that actions and behaviors are influenced by conditioning, regardless of genetic background. I think nurture had a huge impact on the killer's life and made him end up a serial killer. There were signs of his worsening behavior that could have been helped if the parents had just stepped in to correct it. He would have gone on a completely different path. Like the mother could done something when one of Coral Candy Company's teenage male employees complained to Coral's mother that her son had made sexual advances toward him instead of firing the young teen. She could have asked or confronted her son about it, but not wanting to believe her son would do such a thing, she let him continue on his path. Also, Coral revealed that he first realized his homosexuality during service and experienced sexual encounters. His parents could have been supportive and found a way to express his sexuality in a better way. I do not believe his sexuality had anything to do with this though. His parents are not caring enough and pass the responsibility to care for him to others, like his grandma when she requested Coral to move out and live with his grandmother. If his parents were caring and confrontational with him, they could know some of Coral's issues and get some help to steer him on the right path. This is why it was nurture, not nature.